I never thought a simple book could change the way I see the world. But then I picked up Alone in a Room, a true story, and from the very first page, I felt something eerie settle over me. It wasn't just a story, it felt like a whispered confession, a secret meant only for those who dared to listen. And as I read deeper, the line between reality and the book started to blur in ways I never expected. It all began with a woman named Emily. She wasn't a fictional character, but a real person who had documented her own experience of being trapped, alone, isolated, and slowly unraveling. The book was her journal, her desperate attempt to hold on to sanity as days stretched into weeks with no contact from the outside world. There was no dramatic escape, no sudden twist to free her, just her thoughts, her fears, and the walls that seemed to close in a little more each day. As I turned the pages, I could almost hear her breathing, feel her anxiety creeping into my own thoughts. Her words were raw, filled with a mix of dread and hope, as if she was writing to someone, anyone, who might one day find her story. It made me wonder, how does a person survive when there's no one left to hear them? No signs of rescue, no voice responding to their cries? And more importantly, how did Emily end up in that room in the first place? The deeper I went, the more unsettling it became. She described moments that felt too real, as if she knew I was reading her words at that exact moment. Sometimes she even wrote things that mirrored my own thoughts, almost predicting what I would wonder next. Was it just a coincidence, or was there something more to this book? I kept reading, drawn in by an invisible force, unable to put it down. And then something strange happened. As I sat alone in my room, completely absorbed in her story, I heard a sound, soft, almost unnoticeable, but definitely real. A faint knock, not from my door, not from outside, but from somewhere inside the room. I froze. My heart pounded. I turned the page, and there, in her own words, Emily wrote, "If you're reading this, you're not alone anymore." I stared at the words on the page, my breath caught in my throat. If you're reading this, you're not alone anymore. It didn't make sense. It was just a book, a printed, inanimate thing. But at that moment, it felt like Emily was speaking directly to me, as if she knew I was here, in my own room, feeling the same unease she had felt. And then there was the knock. Faint, but real. I wasn't imagining it. Was I? I put the book down for a second, listening carefully. Silence. Maybe it was my mind playing tricks on me, the way it sometimes does when you get too absorbed in something. But the feeling wouldn't go away. The air in my room felt different now, heavier somehow, like I wasn't the only one there. I picked the book back up, my fingers shaking just a little as I turned the page. Emily had written about the same sensation, how, at first, it was just a feeling, like someone watching her from the shadows. Then the small sounds began. A knock, a whisper she couldn't quite make out, a shift in the air, like someone had moved just beyond her sight. She had convinced herself it was nothing, until it wasn't. The more I read, the more I learned about Emily. She wasn't always alone. Before the room, she had a life, a normal one, friends, work, routines. And then something happened, something that led her to this place, locked away, with no way out. She didn't explain everything at once, only hinting at pieces of a story that felt bigger than just her. And then, just as I was about to turn another page, I heard it again. The knock, closer this time. I didn't move. My pulse hammered in my ears as I stared at the book in my hands, every word on the page suddenly feeling too personal, too connected to what was happening in my own room. The knock had been closer this time, too close. I told myself it had to be something logical, the house settling, a draft, maybe even my mind filling in sounds that weren't really there. But deep down, I knew better. Emily had written about this exact moment. The part where she could no longer tell if she was imagining things or if something was truly there with her. She had tried to ignore it at first, convincing herself it was nothing. But then the knocks became footsteps. Shadows moved when they shouldn't. The air carried whispers that weren't her own, and she started to feel like she wasn't just reading something terrifying, she was living it. As I read on, a sickening thought crept into my mind. What if Emily had never actually escaped? What if she was still trapped, somehow reaching out through these pages? And worse, what if I was next? Then, just as I let that thought settle, my bedroom light flickered, and this time I wasn't sure I was alone anymore. The light flickered again, this time staying off for a full second before humming back to life. I gripped the book tighter, my fingers pressing into the worn pages. The room felt different now, thick with something unseen, something I couldn't explain. I glanced around, half expecting to see a shadow shift in the corner, a figure standing just out of reach. But there was nothing, just the quiet hum of electricity and the sound of my own uneven breathing. I forced myself to keep reading. Emily had written about this too. The flickering lights, the strange energy in the room, the way the air seemed to close in around her. It always happened right before. Something changed. Her words grew more frantic, her handwriting jagged, as if she had written them in a hurry. It knows I'm reading. It knows I've figured it out. And now it's coming. A chill ran down my spine. It? What was it? Emily never explained. The pages after that were smudged, as if her pen had dragged across them mid-sentence. And then, just as I was about to turn another page, something crashed to the floor behind me. I spun around. My bookshelf. The book I had picked up earlier, alone in a room, now lay open on the floor, and the page it had landed on held only 4 words. Don't turn the page. I stared at the book lying open on the floor, my breath caught in my throat. Don't turn the page. The words were printed in the same font as the rest of the book, yet something about them felt wrong, like they weren't supposed to be there. My hands were shaking now. Every part of me wanted to listen, to leave it alone, to stop reading. But I couldn't. I had to know. Slowly, I bent down, my fingers brushing against the rough paper. I flipped the page, and that's when I saw it. The next entry wasn't written in the same neat printed text as before. It was scribbled, messy, almost frantic. You've gone too far. It's watching now. My heart pounded in my chest. I flipped another page, my breath shallow. The handwriting had changed again. This time, the words weren't Emily's. They were mine. My own handwriting, scrawled across the page, as if I had written them myself. But I hadn't. Stop reading. Stop now. The room felt smaller, darker. My reflection in the window no longer moved in sync with me. I blinked, stepping closer. The reflection hesitated, then smiled. My stomach dropped. I wasn't smiling. Then the lights cut out completely. And I wasn't alone. Darkness swallowed the room. I stood frozen, my breath shallow, my pulse thudding in my ears. The silence was thick, pressing in from all sides. Then, in the pitch black, I heard it, a whisper, so close it could have been right beside me. You shouldn't have turned the page. My body jolted. I spun around blindly, reaching for my phone, for any source of light. My fingers fumbled across the screen, but before I could turn it on, something brushed against my arm. Cold, deliberate, I stumbled backward, heart racing. The book lay open on the floor, its pages shifting as if touched by an unseen hand. Then, just as suddenly as the lights had gone out, they flickered back on. I gasped, my eyes darting around the room. Empty. Everything exactly where it had been. Except for one thing, the mirror. I turned to face it, dread curling in my stomach. My reflection was there, but something was wrong. It was me, same face, same clothes, but the expression wasn't mine. It was still smiling, watching. Then slowly, the reflection raised its hand, but I hadn't moved. I stumbled back, but my reflection didn't. Instead, it took a step forward, and then, before I could react, it reached out, straight through the glass. The last thing I saw was my own hand, gripping mine, yanking me forward. The lights flickered once more, and in the mirror, my reflection stood alone, still smiling. I was on the other side now, and the book had a new story to tell. The moment my hand was pulled through the glass, everything shifted. There was no impact, no shattering of the mirror, just a sickening, weightless sensation, like falling without moving. And then I was standing in a room that wasn't mine. It looked like mine. The same walls, the same furniture, the same book lying open on the floor. But something was off. The air felt heavy, dense, as if the space around me wasn't entirely real. I turned to the mirror, heart pounding. My reflection was still there, but it wasn't mimicking my movements anymore. It was staring at me, that same eerie smile stretched across its face, and then, slowly, it bent down, picked up the book, and closed it. A sharp, cold silence filled the room. I ran to the mirror, pressing my palms against the glass, but there was no give. My reflection had taken my place. It turned, walked to the door, and reached for the handle. My handle. It was leaving. I screamed, pounded on the glass, but it was useless. The last thing I saw before everything faded was my own face, watching me. Then darkness. When I opened my eyes, I was back in the room, but it wasn't my room anymore. The air was stale. The walls seemed older, cracked, and in the center of the floor, where the book had been, was something else, a mirror. I crawled toward it, my breath shaking. My reflection was gone. Or maybe I was. And then, from the other side of the glass, I heard a knock. Software faint. Someone else was reading the book now, and it was their turn.